Hello everyone and welcome to the Adam Kiss Show. Today I'm going to be talking about differences between film and theater in terms of acting and directing. Since I have experience in both, I hope I can give you some valuable insights into the key differences and similarities. And by the end, I'm sure that you will be completely enlightened as to their differences and similarities. At least I hope so, and maybe I'll enlighten myself in the process. All right, well, in the meantime, I'm on all social media platforms, so be sure to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, all the social media platforms, and let's get right into it. So the differences between film and theater. It's a kind of a classic war, definitely in the acting world. And it certainly used to be that there were theater actors and then there were film actors. And I know that in the past, theater actors would often look down at film and film actors, thinking that that was kind of a cheaper form of entertainment and that people who acted in film had kind of sold out. I'm going to come right out and say, I hope not controversially, that I don't think that's the case at all. I think that they're both hard in their own ways. And I know it was actually Elizabeth Taylor who said, when people criticized her husband, one of her husbands, Richard Burton, who was a great British actor. Anyway, critics were criticizing him for kind of selling out and doing more films when he was a wonderful theater actor as well. And I believe Elizabeth Taylor retorted back that film acting is actually, in a way, harder because you have to do the scenes out of order, disjointed, and you can't have the kind of emotional arc that's so easy to do when you're doing one performance of a theater play. And in the same way, you could say that theater is harder because you have to do everything in one take. There's no take two, and you have to deliver night after night. So they're both hard. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. As a viewer, they both have good and bad things about them. I mean, film is great. And when I say film, I mean film and TV. I mean anything that's really on camera. But the on-camera arts are great because you can reach a larger audience, obviously. It's not just in the moment, and you're not limited by the amount of people that can fit in that particular theater. Theater is more of an intimate experience. It's in the moment and then it's gone. It's not recorded, so it's a moment shared between the performers and the audience, which is a beautiful thing. It's more of a temporary art. Obviously, in the modern day, so many theater productions are filmed, so that aspect of it has disappeared a bit. A lot of them have thankfully been recorded for posterity. We're all very grateful for that, especially with certain productions. But basically, I'm an actor, and I'm also a director, and I'm also a writer. And there are playwrights and screenwriters. There's actors for film and actors for theater. And then there's finally directors in theater and directors for film. And oftentimes, they will overlap. So a screenwriter can also write plays. A film actor may suddenly do a Broadway show, as they often do. And the same for a famous director. They may do a theater production, or they may start in theater and move to film. So it really varies. I had my start more on the theatrical side. I was trained at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, as well as Stella Adler, but I was trained in theater a lot. So that was really what we were trained in. We were doing plays, excerpts from plays, scenes. I did a bunch of Shakespeare in my time. I did some in Stratford-upon-Avon. Absolutely loved going there. And again, my background was that. And then when I moved more into opera at Manhattan School of Music and the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, I was doing live performance. It was another branch of live performance. It was opera, so live opera. Live music was, in addition, an extra facet of that, which is always interesting, because you have the orchestra, you have the added thing of not just your other scene partners, but you also have the orchestra and conductor, and you have that extra aspect to think of in your mind. So that's all very interesting. I think that one of the most interesting things about theater is the fact that really anything goes, and you can do something. If you make a mistake, you just keep going, and you can do a different performance each night. You can try something new each night. I think that's an absolutely beautiful thing. I think that there's a magic in being able to give a different audience a different performance. And, you know, for one audience that saw it, it can be a totally different performance than another audience that saw it. I know that I already mentioned Richard Burton. I know that he loved to change his performance. I have heard about how when he did Hamlet on Broadway, he changed his performance quite a bit from night to night. That was a wonderful production that was actually directed by John Gielgud on Broadway, and it was because he made a bet with Peter O'Toole about playing Hamlet, and Peter O'Toole ended up playing Hamlet on the West End on Broadway, directed by Laurence Olivier, and Richard Burton was on Broadway with John Gielgud. But I digress. The point is that I have a background in theater, but then I also have a background in film, especially recently. So during the pandemic, I transitioned to doing a lot of film. I started directing my own short films. I won a bunch of awards from festivals, about 30 or so awards, including 6 Best Actor awards. So I was very happy about that. It was really an honor to be greeted with success immediately out of the gate making short films. Obviously, I made them because I love to make them, and I make them for myself. I think that's something that's very important to say, that all of this I'd be doing for myself if there was not a single other person alive on Earth. If I was the last man alive, I'd still be making films, trying to do my best to do that, because it doesn't matter if anyone sees them. I'm making them for myself to fulfill my artistic vision, fulfill my creativity. And then yes, if other people like them, it's so wonderful. I'm so happy about that. And it's a great thing. I believe that's a beautiful thing. And I believe that an audience is such an important part. But the point is that I would still be doing what I'm doing if there was nobody around to see it. It's kind of like the whole thing. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to see it, would it still make a noise? Well, I say yes, it would still make a noise because I'm still there to hear it, if that makes sense. But anyway, so let me dive into some more differences. So in terms of acting, people always say that for film you have to give less. And that's really the worst direction that could possibly ever be given to any actor in the history of time. I mean, there is truth to it. You know, when a director says, oh, that's great, just give less or 10% less, that's what they mean by that is that the camera sees more. You know, and it depends which shot, obviously. If they're doing a wide shot, it is kind of more like theater, but it still has to match in terms of continuity. So when you're doing your close-up, you know, the camera, you can't lie to the camera, you know, you can't hide anything from the camera. That's really a phrase that's so true. The camera sees everything, you know, whereas in the theater, you have to perform to the very last row of the theater. For the camera, you know, you just have to really be completely honest in the moment, in the performance. And it'll pick up on the most subtle things. I mean, there was this story of Orson Welles, and his famous story was that he visited Gary Cooper on the set of one of his films when he was in Hollywood. This was sometime in the 1940s. And, you know, he was about to go out to lunch with Gary Cooper for some reason or another. And he happened to stay and watch the last few takes of the scene before lunch. So the interesting thing was he was watching them and he was thinking, they can't possibly use that. I mean, that's nothing. And then he happened to see the rushes of that, and it was all there, and it was amazing. And I think that's so true. You never really know what you get in film until you see it, until you see it back. And it's really interesting how certain people who perhaps are not as good in theater are perfect for film, and vice versa. Some people who are perfect for film are maybe not as good as for theater. Like in Billy, when Jack Lemmon was doing one of his first films for Billy Wilder, he would perform. He was a big theater actor. At least he had some background in theater. So he was used to, you know, going full out, you know, giving a great performance, doing this. And I think Billy Wilder would, after each take, would say, okay, less. And then Jack Lemmon would do less. And then again, Billy Wilder would come back and say, okay, that was great, but let's do less. And then Billy Wilder would do less again. And Billy Wilder then would say less again. And the process would keep going until Jack Lemmon finally burst out and said, well, if I do any less than that, I'm not going to be doing anything at all. And Billy Wilder apparently said, now you're getting the idea. And there's definitely some truth to that. But I hesitate to use the word just doing less, because in a certain way, you're doing more. Like the wheels have to be turning more. You have to be more authentic. It has to be more real. And that's how some people got kind of sucked into the whole method thing, the whole method version of acting where you don't break character. I personally don't subscribe to that at all, but I can see how they can, because it's very difficult. It's not an easy process, let's put it that way. I mean, it's not an easy process, let's put it that way. I mean, filmmaking, there's nothing easy about it, and in theater, nothing's easy about it either, but they're difficult in different ways. So essentially, they're both different, we get it. But now, how are they the same? Well, I actually happen to think that they're more the same than they are different, despite the fact that they do have obvious differences. I've had several people I've talked to have said, oh, how different, film acting versus theater acting is. And on the other token, I've heard so many people say, it's basically the same thing. And I'm really more of that school. It's basically the same thing. I don't think that you have to change yourself when you're going from theater to film or from film to theater. If you're doing a great, honest performance in theater, you're going to do a great, honest performance in film. And vice versa. If you're doing a great performance in film, then what's the fact that maybe you have to project a little more? That's minimal. That's a small detail. At least I believe it's a very, very, very small detail in the grand scheme of things. And in terms of directing, I mean, so many directors have come from theater and made great films. I mean, Orson Welles was a great director and actor, but he started out in theater and then famously had the best deal of all time when he made Citizen Kane, in terms of complete creative control, no studio notes. He could do whatever subject he wanted. And that was an absolutely incredible deal, which he never managed to get again in life. So funnily enough, he peaked kind of early, and he's one of the greatest directors, obviously, of all time. But he started in theater with his Mercury Theater, and then he transitioned to film with Citizen Kane, and made what many people today would consider probably a very theatrical film with Citizen Kane. It was very unusual. Even today, it looks very avant-garde. The choices he made in terms of using so many wide shots, covering so many people's faces in shadow, like the journalist who goes around looking for the meaning of Rosebud. His face is either covered in shadow or you see the back of his head. But that was an interesting choice. And also with his character of Kane, you don't see him too much in close-up except for the pivotal moments. But so many shots are wider shots of him. There was so many kind of he had a very theatrical way of directing the scene. And I know his cinematographer, Toland, he was very keen to work with him because Welles didn't yet know what couldn't be done. And so they tried a bunch of things that had never been done before, and some of which are used to this day, and some of which are not really used at all. And honestly, I wish some of the techniques they used were used more. I mean, I think today close-ups are overused, and also cutting back and forth, between characters is so much overused that it's just too much, I think. So I think that oftentimes a scene can be better when there's less of that. Funnily enough, I always tell this story about how Orson Welles always said that you can learn all the technical side of filmmaking in a day and a half. And I think that's so true. So if you have a theater background, you can make films much more easier than if you just have a technical film background. It may be harder to suddenly go and direct theater. Obviously, theater is a little more claustrophobic in terms of setting often. Like the settings for plays are often in a couple of rooms in a house, or if it's a Chekhov drama, something like that. Or maybe there's more locations, but it's more up to the imagination. Like with Shakespeare, there's so many locations, but you have to pretend with your imagination that it's outside the castle of Elsinore at midnight, when in the meantime, in the Globe Theatre, it was the middle of the day as the play was going on. So all kinds of things like that. It's very interesting. I mean, with theater, as an audience member, you have to use your imagination. It's not as spelled out. With film, you can spell everything out more. It's such a visual medium, you can show everything. You can do more of the show, don't tell principle, whereas in plays, you may have to tell a little bit more. Or not, it depends really, how much information you want to give to the audience, how much you want to leave to audience interpretation. And I think that audience interpretation is a beautiful thing. Everyone who's followed me since the beginning knows that I love to leave things up to the audience's interpretation. I absolutely love not to spell everything out. But that doesn't mean that with film you can't, you can't tell the story visually. In other words, when you convert a play to a film, there's always this phrase that people use of, oh, how are you going to open it up from its kind of claustrophobic, few-room setting? And it's not necessary to open it up in all cases. I mean, so many movies, great movies, have been made in just a couple of rooms or a couple of locations. I think that really a film or a play is what you make of it. They can absolutely overlap. I do not think they have to be as different as people claim they are. And the final point I wanted to bring across was directing in film versus theater. Now, directing can be a very different thing because in theater, you often have a month, maybe more, to rehearse, to block the scenes, to find the characters together as a group with the director and actor and the actors with their scene partners. Not often so in film. Oftentimes there's little to no rehearsal. Some directors do rehearse much more and some don't rehearse at all. So that is a big difference. And I would say, honestly, that is the main difference between film and theater, is the fact of rehearsal time. Other than that, I mean, you're aiming to touch the audience, you're aiming to inhabit the character. All of that's the same. You're aiming to, whether you're a screenwriter or a playwright, you're aiming to tell a great story. All of that is essentially the same. But what's often very different is the rehearsal time. Great. Well, that was this episode of The Adam Kiss Show, and tune in next time for more on filmmaking, art, theater, or just life in general. Follow me on social media, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the social media accounts. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day, everyone. Bye.